I'm so delighted today to have with us a very, very special and very eminent person, Dr. Balasubramaniam, who's called Dr. Balu. He's a widely respected development expert, public policy analyst, leadership trainer, and author, and has spent many decades living in the forest-based tribal communities in Mysore. Dr. Balu founded the Swami Vivekanand Youth Movement, a renowned development organization, and he's also the founder of Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, a public policy think tank. He's a professor at Cornell for several years, as well as with IIT Delhi. He's coached and mentored leaders across different organizations, and there are 4 very interesting books that he's written. The first of his, it's called I, the Citizen. The second one is Voices from the Grassroots. The third, which you must read, is Leadership Lessons for Daily Living. And the recent book that he's just published is Power Within, the Leadership Legacy of Narendra Modi, which is actually a textbook that incorporates examples of leadership insights from Western as well as Indic wisdom. It is such a wonderful book. It gives you insights and it sort of sets you off onto a journey of exploring all those insights that you do. So welcome, Dr. Balu, to Tutul Dialogues, a deep conversation with unique and insightful individuals. Welcome to Tutul Dialogues. Tutul Dialogues is about deep dialogues with unique and insightful individuals, and we are honored to have Dr. Balu with us here today. So welcome, Dr. Balu, to this edition of Tutul Dialogues. Let me start.
Thank you for having me here.
In the last few months, we've been working and Tutul Consulting on this concept of Bharat at 100 and what kind of institutions and leaders are required to take us there. Now, you are also a very veteran leadership trainer, practitioner, and so are we. So my first question is, if you look at the community of people who work in leadership or in OD, all of us practitioners, what do you think are some of the mindsets and practices we need to adopt to shape thinking around leadership?
That's a great question to begin with, Sujata ji. And, my answer might be a little candid, but being from the space, being from the world of OD, which you also do a lot of work on, most of our training and most of our knowledge and frameworks, etc., usually comes from westernized models. Well, I have nothing against it because all of us learned it and all of us have tested it and used it in different settings. But this mindset that it's a homogeneous model which can be applicable to every part of this world, it's fundamentally flawed. I think each of us is a product of our upbringing, our cultural baggages or strengths, the resources that we carry. Each of us have our own cultural competencies, which is embedded in a particular context. And so to homogenize a model means we are operating in frameworks which may not really fit and we force fit it on our ecosystems. And I'm no different. I was that space. And then when I started challenging myself and saying it's very nice and my workshops are very popular, I get very high ratings, but there's actual change happening. And I noticed when I used to run workshops in the US, the particular results were different. When I ran it in Egypt, it was different. In Thailand was different. Back here in India, it's very different. That's when I started really asking myself, am I trying to homogenize a product and therefore expect that the rest of the world should get homogenized? Now, the whole context of Western thinking is exactly that. Anything that came from zones which they could not appreciate or understand, they dismiss it off as trivial or knowledge of the natives. And they wanted to sort of, whether it's democracy or concept of human rights or leadership in the space that we operate in, they said that our model is right and so everybody else should follow this model. Otherwise, it's model is the model in which you are operating or the context in which you're operating should alter to suit our models. I think that's a sort of an arrogant, intellectual arrogance in a space, but also it's actually intellectual stupidity because I can't understand you, I can't relate to your context. Therefore, I'll ask you to change your context and sort of take mine. And more I went deep into it, I thought, let me understand what is so special about India. Is it really a difference? And it's very nice to emotionally talk about it and romanticize and say everything Bharatiya is great, but do you have the evidence for it? Because that's what finally matters in a global world. You can't just talk with emotion. Well, it can take you a little bit distance, but it can't take you very far for too long. So I started understanding that my first fundamental handicap was my knowledge of Sanskrit to the depth at which one needs to know. So I just had a rudimentary understanding, but I thought, let me start with that, polish it as I go along. Even simple things like, moral reasoning, right? Moral reasoning, we talk about it from a Western framework of Jeremy Bentham or John Rawls or Michel Sandel. But we don't really think that moral reasoning is embedded in our lives the way we have grown up, whether it is Jataka tales or Panchatantra in a simplistic fashion that's provided to us, or larger epics, complex epics like Ramayana or Mahabharata, which are stories within stories within stories. And then whether it's even a scriptural text or treatise like Bhagavad Gita or the several Upanishads that we have, we all see them as just folklore, or we see them as spiritual texts only meant for people in serious spiritual practice. But we don't really connect to them in the leadership space. So I realized that if I can unpack it to the extent I can, obviously it's interpretational, and situate it in the context of India and try it out. So the Leadership Institute, which I started in Mysore, I started rolling these models out with enormous impact. The strange thing I found is this is so very paradigmatically embedded in human existence. It doesn't matter where you are. In a sense, I won't say it's culture agnostic, but one can relate to it whichever space that you operate in. So I could take this to corporate world, to civil society world, to the academic world, or even to different geographical situations where I could build the context of this and then embed it in their thinking. It worked very well. So it was very easy for me to situate this model. And for 15 years, I taught this course in Cornell, and my students loved it. So I realized that it's easy for others who are now struggling with the complex problems of the world. And also today's context is different. We are globally connected. It's very easy to relate to an Indian context today and then learn from it. And that's how the journey began. It's a long answer, I know, but I thought I should possibly give this context. And so it's really the traditional wisdom that India carries. And I am informed mostly by our scriptures, by Swami Vivekananda's works, because most of my life's learning comes from his message, and from the actual lived experience of close to 3 decades living and working with indigenous tribal communities, seeing traditional chieftains who had no other access to any other kind of knowledge, but just their own traditional wisdom and the way they operated. And that was great learning for me. And that's how my this body of knowledge I started building up within myself.
You used a very nice phrase. You said stories within stories within stories, and all our learning typically is stories. Can you recount any one story, maybe from the Mahabharata or Ramayana or any of the books that really, brings forth so many dimensions of the topic that we're talking about, which is leadership?
I'll possibly situate it specifically in public leadership, right? Because we normally don't see Ramayana or Mahabharata as treatises giving us knowledge of public leadership. Though Mahabharata, both of them essentially are, they talk about kings and the way countries are ruled and the enmity that is spread within the countries. Actual real life context even today, right? There's so much of challenges in the political space. All countries have these challenges. Just imagine the war is just done. Well, it's all done and dusted for the time being. Yudhishthira is lying on his deathbed, which means the man is about to depart. Sorry, not Yudhishthira, Bhishma. And Yudhishthira goes to him and tells him, grandfather, it's all done. And whether we like it or not, we killed our cousins and we now have to rule the kingdom. Now we got to deliver. See, that's the beauty of it. After the heat and dust of the Kurukshetra of elections, we got to reconcile and say we have to run the damn country. Unfortunately, today we don't think like that. But that was what it was thought about those days. And Yudhishthira goes to him and says, "Can you please tell me?" Though Yudhishthira himself was known for his righteousness, he has the wisdom and the humility, and that's described in several, in the scriptural knowledge of India as mantra shakti, the power of counsel. And that's what a cabinet is all about. He goes to Bhishma and says, "Please, can you tell me how to run this country?" And Bhishma gives him 10 tenets, such powerful, beautiful tenets which are even today relevant. That's what he calls as Raja Dharma, and says a king's dharma is only these 10 things. From economy to environment to trade to seeking counsel to taking care of citizens to social welfare, Bhishma covered everything. And now, when we talk of good governance today, what do we talk about? We talk about the 8 point framework that World Bank democratizes and say all over the world, everybody should follow this. But then we had a more extensive, more deeper, more wider, more concrete, and more practical 10 tenet Rajadharma, which is a perfect example of good governance. And we don't see it as that. But not just Mahabharata, where one would expect that war is happening, kings fight, and then you have to rule the country. Ramayana has got a different context. Where Ramayana, we see it more as an individual. We celebrate Rama, Maryada Purusha, like the ideal human being that you can see. That's all perfect. To say how should each of us be. But then in the Ramayana itself, and Valmiki writes it so beautifully in his Valmiki Ramayana, there's a particular section on which Bharata goes to Rama and he tells him, listen, this life is unfair. Whatever you say, you're following our father's orders and you're following your son's, as a son, you're following the dharma of a son. Please look at me. Look at me, your brother. I was the youngest of the family. I was the fun-loving character who could afford to be happy-go-lucky fellow because you had the responsibilities. You were trained to be the king. You were coronated even. You were given that title. All of a sudden, you just decide to walk away. And my mother decides that I should be the king and goes to her father and does this. I'm not even prepared. He has the humility to say, I'm not ready. I might be trained like you. I might have taken the same archery classes. I might have gone with you to with Vishwamitra to the jungles along with you. But that doesn't mean a damn thing because my mindset, look at the context. In leadership and OD, we talk about creating a culture, creating the behavioral mindset to actually perform or lead or work in teams. And here Bharata says this. I don't have the mindset. Your mindset was ready. But now at least tell me, I can take your padukas and make it representative of you, but I cannot run the kingdom exactly the way you would deliver until you tell me what should I follow. And Rama gives him a complete description of what he as a king should do. That's so beautiful. That's completely on how to run a kingdom. Again, like Mahabharata, it talks about every aspect of practicality of governance. Now, each of our scriptures like this is loaded, but in a particular context, just 600 years ago, Chanakya writes in Arthashastra, very straightforward, he says, there are only two things a king should do. Like every institution has a purpose. We talk of, like again in OD, we say, you create a structure to fulfill the function of that institution, right? And Kautilya is straightforward. He says the structure of the state is clear. The king rules it in the context in which he spoke. The functions are clear, deliver on governance. How do you measure governance? These are only two things. He was very simplistic. He didn't give 10 pointers and all. He said, Loka Sangraha, Yoga Kshem. So beautifully said. Loka Sangraha is the society welfare. But Yoga Kshema is a very deep word. It's very powerful. It says the king's responsibility is to protect the securities of citizens, securities that have already been acquired by them, plus making sure they're able to acquire the other securities while living in that kingdom. It could be emotional, political, social, religious, all kinds of securities. But he says this is possible only by a ruler. He also defines a ruler here, and that's a beauty. The leader, or you can call him for people exercising leadership. He says only a Indriya Vijayi can actually deliver this to citizens. Somebody who understands Indriya Nigra. Now the West can never understand Indriya Nigra because the West is all about celebrating sensuality. Whereas here we talk about the person who wins over his sense organs. And that's the beauty. That's a difference, but also the beauty.
Can you describe, your book is titled The Power Within, the Leadership and Legacy of Narendra Modi, and there is this context of power within and power without. Can you explain what the difference between the two is?
It's again another great question because a lot of people ask me, why have we called it power within? And I think anybody from India can more easily relate to it. I'd like to explain it a little more. See, when I started real deep research into this more than 15 years ago, different material I should read and understand and appreciate. And one of the things I read in the early days was Archie Brown's The Myth of a Strong Leader.
Yes.
Where he talks about and analyzes 5 different leadership styles, mostly the political public space context. All of them Western and one Russian, 4 and others. But he talks about the myth to have a strong leader. And I was asking myself, in our context, we have had some great leaders who are strong in their own ways. Whether it's Gandhi or whether it is Prime Minister Modi today, we can easily see them as strong leaders because we don't see strength as power and authority or the expression of it. Whereas the West for them, the primary distinction is, and I realize that I can't reconcile to this. He says such a leader can't exist for long. There will be casualties to the country's progress if there's a strong leader, and all kinds of arguments he makes. Well, some of it in the Western construct might be true from the analysis he makes. I then looked at it and said, what I couldn't fundamentally come to terms with was his understanding and appreciation of what power is. Because they were all seeing leadership as not about action you perform, but about being a leader. So the celebration was the noun form, the person form. And my identity comes from the followers I can have behind me. So if you remove my followers, then I'm not a leader anymore. That's how they see it. But in India, the beauty is we don't see it as being a leader. It's about the actions you perform in the exercise of leadership. And it's a huge distinction where it's a verb form that we celebrate, the action part of it, the karma part of it. and it's not about being Krishna, it's about the Bhagavad Gita being given to us by Krishna. And the more important thing I said, they look at power from an external expression. Power over my followers, power over the people I control and run. If I'm the CEO, the power over my organization. Whereas India looks at Indriya Nigraha. India is constantly battling to tell us how to get over, subsume or sublimate our ego. The aham has to be taken care of, where it's not about I doing the work, but it's about the work getting done. Whereas in the West, it's about constantly reminding yourself and the rest of the people around you, I'm doing it. You got a problem, come to me. I'm the CEO. Here it is about the CEO getting the work done. And it's a huge distinction because when you're getting the work done, you're building leadership in others by default. But if you're seen to be getting the work done, you can go through crisis of insecurities. If somebody else is growing as fast, we see it in the political space, right? If somebody else is growing as fast as you, don't want them to grow, you try to scuttle them. This happens in everywhere. I've been a coach for several corporate leaders, for several boards, and I know exactly how the dynamics plays out. Though we say all this, but in reality, the human spirit is all about I. And Indianness is all about renegotiating I and transcending it and saying, we, in the context of not just you and I separate, but in the Advaitic concept of I merging into the we. And that's a very, very, very nuanced appreciation of leadership itself.
I can see Swami Vivekananda's photo behind you, and there's a very interesting anecdote you recount about. We read about servant leadership, and we are so moved by Greenleaf. And you talk about a letter he writes where he embodies the spirit. Since we are on the same topic, can you please share that anecdote with all of
Yeah,
us?
actually, in 1897, he first uses the word, you got to lead like a child, you got to lead like a servant. That's what he says. A child cries, mother rushes to it. She doesn't ask herself, what child can't dictate terms to me.
Mm-hmm.
And she says the spirit of a servant, it's not about being a servant, it's about the mindset of serving.
Mm-hmm.
And he describes the word, you should actually, the spirit should be like a servant leader. And it was 1897. In 1930, Greenleaf wrote, in the 60s, Harvard popularized it. But nobody credits Vivekananda because we don't see him as a leadership expert. We see him as a monk who just spoke something and left. But in the context in which he says it's so beautiful, for him, service, he says it's not about standing on a pedestal and saying, here, my poor man, take my 5 cents. But considering yourself privileged that there's a poor man for you to serve. Where he says it's, like Gandhi says, it's about discovering your true self by dissolving in service in the other. That's extremely difficult and complex for a Western-oriented guy to think and understand because there it's always separation. I have to be seen to be separate and helping you. Whereas in India, we don't talk of helping. Helping is a sacrilege. And Vivekananda says you cannot help anybody. And when does it become seva? Seva you can't even explain in English. He says seva, and Prime Minister keeps talking of seva bha. When does it actually become seva? When you do it as, when you see the God in the other. You are expected to realize God in yourself, but it's not very easy. It's easy to see God in the other. And it's in every act of yours, every leadership act of yours, done for the other, selflessly, without any expectation, non-judgmentally as well as non-transactionally. Now, I don't expect Sujata ji to do something else for me in return, but I just do it because that's my dharma, that's my nature, to just serve the other. In that space is what service is, where I celebrate the divinity in you. That is real servant leadership. Today, servant leadership is actually not really completely understood. Right? The West is trying to come to terms, but that is so natural to us. I don't even think in the context in which possibly in the socialized construct of maybe you operating with your parents, you might be a great OD expert to the rest of the world. But at home, when your mother or dad says something, it doesn't take an effort for you to say yes to them. It comes naturally. You can say I'm their daughter, it's respect, but the deep cultural genetic material is seva to the parents. It's not no big deal for us, and you don't really feel, oh, she must be very great, she must be great, oh, she still serves her parents. No, that's a normative thing for us in our appreciation. That's a cultural appropriateness I talk about. So seva is not expecting anything in return. I drop a pen, you pick it up and give it to me, and I don't say thank you to you. I'm sure a thought will cross a person's mind saying, what, this person is so ungrateful. I picked up the pen for him or her and he can't even say thank you to me. That is not seva. That is just helping somebody else. Real seva is, I don't really care. My dharma is to help you. And I just go on, move on. It doesn't matter whether you thank me, don't thank me, and go on. That is real servant leadership. And that's the space in spirit in which when PM says Pradhan Sevak, he's contextualizing in that space where I don't really want anything in return. I just want to do this because I'm just celebrating the divinity in the other. And that's it.
I'm sure there were very interesting. There are several anecdotes in the book, but I'm sure there were several experiences, anecdotes you have of the process of studying Prime Minister Modi and looking at his leadership style. Is there any interesting anecdote that is very close to your heart that embodies his unique style of leading?
You know, several things I've written. There are many things I have not written because I wrote it in the context of analyzing his leadership. But several things are just taken for granted. For example, I write a lot about karuna or compassion. And normally in the public space, most of us judge people from what we think we know of them. And mostly what we know is what is presented to us today in the world of social media or televisions or newspaper articles. And we simply accept that they could be correct. No, we don't even question it. We don't have time to even debate it. We just go along with what our mind says could be okay. This could be true and go on. So most of us have seen him as a tough. At least I, before I started working under him, I realized that for me it was just a television screen or a newspaper. Like exactly, I was in the same trap. Judging him from what I was fed. And depending on which side of the fence you were, you took that bit of information and processed it. And that's a problem today. Everything is binary or everything is so very.
Yeah, you're either for or against. There is no
It
middle
was
ground.
stupid, right? And we don't really take the pains to actually look at some evidence and tell us as objectively what the truth is. This gave me an opportunity to objectively assess him. And what I had an impression of him was tough, stern, disciplinarian, always working, never really concerned about anybody else. But the soft, motherly human side of him, the concern he has for people who work around him, the concern he would ask about us when we went and met him. Completely no reason. After all, the prime minister of the country, he's got a job to do, he's so busy, just stick to the soft side of him, I would say the feminine side of him, the inner mother in him. And two things which the public could possibly have seen, and especially because I saw it in several circumstances, two specific anecdotes I can remember recently is when Jasprit Bumrah and his wife met the prime minister with their child, and PM carries the baby, and if you see that act of love transacting between like a grandfather holding on to this little grandchild, and you can actually feel it. No, that is what I write in Sadharanikarana Sahardayata, and he can connect to that small little baby so intensely. And if you can recollect the sad, difficult time we had in Wayanad and such a loss of valuable lives, and it was very painful tragedy for the country. And the prime minister goes there and is visiting hospitals, and that child sitting with her mother on the bed, and the way the prime minister is consoling her, patting her on the head and talking to her, you can see that instant connection, the 7, 8 year old. And that is the prime minister I have seen a lot. The compassion, that immediate concern that I got to do something about it. And the least in that context he could do, apart from what he could have done, he's done as a prime minister for the tragedy, etc., is the child should feel comfortable and secure. And he could communicate that in that instant of time. And this is something which we just don't really go deep enough in seeing. And his sense of the humility is something to be experienced. One would imagine that after 50 years of public life, close to 24, 25 years in head of government, in state or now at the national, at the country level, such a popular leader with 78% popularity rating, well respected around the world, one would expect him to carry that weight around. But it's just not there. In a few seconds of meeting him, for us, he's the prime minister. We are stressed and tense. Even now, I go in his presence. It is not easy. Though I've had a lot of one-to-one conversations with him. As an author, it's different, but as a person working in the commission and going to him, it's different feeling. But he makes you feel so at ease, and that he communicates comfort, and you can feel very different in his presence, which you don't experience in the presence of a very charismatic, especially a charismatic person like him. He can bring you down to his level. He can also reduce himself to any level. He can take you up to his level also, and that's not easy for that's a sort of an extraordinary leadership thing that I've seen in him.
One of the components of charisma is, they say, making the other person feel, even if that leader spends 3 minutes with you, you feel as if you are the center of that person's world. And that is, they say, one of the components. Now, I work with a lot of leaders, and there's this perennial battle between, should I be task force focused or should I be people focused? And I think last 30 years, everyone's talking about it. So the question is that on one hand, we have to be strong and decisive and show the direction, and leader is one who has the vision. On the other hand, we want leaders who are vulnerable and authentic and share their struggles. How do you how do you balance both? I mean, it's easy to say it is not either or, it is both, it is this and that. How does one do this? I need to be the strong person putting that strong face versus saying, I really don't know what to do, but we'll figure it out. How would you answer this?
Yeah, I think those driven by a sense of authority. Most people confuse leadership for authority. And I would like to start off with authority is, positional, or it comes from a space where you're either given authority, and most of the time we get our authority from people around us. They authorize us to do what we do. So CEO is a position of authority. A CEO can also be a position of leadership. Very rarely people mix the two. And when you mix the two, there's no conflict. You are focused on the work at the center. And the real leadership is about giving the work back to the people where it rightfully belongs. If I take over and start doing the work myself, that is authority, where I have to constantly establish my credibility, my legitimacy of my position, and communicate that I know more than you. But if I'm secure with what I am and I'm operating with this work needs to get done, so the best possible person to do this is what I'm going to encourage. Then this people is also involved, the task is also involved. When you don't make yourself the work at the center, authority always makes I put myself at the center. Now, in my own personal life, I've gone through this, and it was a major learning for me. I was celebrated for the tribal development work I have done. And, after some time, people write about you, people make movies. I had seen television shows, made awards following. And the former Chief Minister of Karnataka wrote my biography. I thought, wow, I must be really great. And slowly, the work at the center was no longer tribal development. It was all about I being seen to be doing tribal development. And then I realized it is exactly the opposite of what leadership is. So I had to be the person doing everything and seem to be doing everything, taking control, telling everybody everything. It took me a lot of mindful learning and watching myself. And even now I slip once in a while. That's normal in people's lives. But I'm much more conscious about the fact that the work needs to get done. It's not about I doing it, I seem to be doing it. And I think this is enormous. And once you do that, then people matter, then stakeholders matter, their perspectives matter. We be respectful of them, listen to them, and see, is there a better perspective in getting this work done differently? If it is only my way or the highway, it'll happen only when I want to be seen to be doing it. But when I want the work to get done, it doesn't matter who's giving the ideas, who's coming and doing it. In actually, real leadership is being present in your absence, and that is very powerful, and teams really love that. I work with a lot of young people in my office. I enjoy working with them. You just give them the space, the ability to make mistakes, and the freedom to do it, but within reasonable boundaries, and the responsibility to own up the mistakes and work to correct it. You just give them the credit that is richly deserving because they are the ones who did it, and you just take credit for giving it to them. So I enjoy it, man. And you see that they really flower out. So the task gets done, people also grow. And hopefully they'll emulate it when they reach positions of authority tomorrow in their life. So I don't really believe it's a dichotomy there. It's actually, if you see yourself as the work getting done rather than I should be getting the work done, I think there's no dichotomy. The moment you say I, then there is truly a dichotomy there.
There are two characteristics I find in many organizations when I work with them. One is that collaboration is a big challenge. Right from the time we are born, we're trying to get into college, getting into school, we are fighting to get in, and I don't really care what my peer gets in. So collaboration is a challenge, and sometimes they say we need a strong leader to force collaboration. So that's one phenomena. The second one is linked to what you were saying, which is unwilling to let go and micromanaging because I have to get it right. These two phenomena seem to be a common recurrence in many organizations that we see. Is this something we need to re-examine as a nation in terms of why this is a repeated pattern? Is there a pattern you see? What do you think we need to do differently to challenge this thinking?
I think it's definitely true. It's a pattern, whether it's a small organization, it's a large country, whether it's positions that we're all talking about, especially when these positions are scarce and there's a competition to acquire that, all these things happen. But just look at, I would like to hear quote Robert Keegan's work, he's educational psychologist at Harvard Ed School.
Yeah.
He looks at it in three dimensions and his assessments of CEOs and the way they operate. Now, all of us are a bundle of three different kinds of subject-object relationship space. We all manifest all these three kinds. It's a journey we all keep traveling from front to back all the time. First, he calls it a socialized mindset, where we are incapable of forming our own views or opinions of things, and we depend on somebody else presenting that reality to us. We are dependent on the reality. Ideally, it's children. If you have a young child, of 5, 6 year old child, and you tell the child, I always have this practical example for myself. Once I was driving from Bangalore to Chennai, my son was around 3, 4 years old, and he was looking at all the rocks near Kolar, and he was explaining near Kolar near Bangalore, and as we got closer to a hillock, he would say, "Oh ma, look this Amma, look at this rock, it grew so big." And then my wife would explain, no, no, it rock didn't grow. When you're looking at it from far, it looks small. When you come near, it becomes big. And the child simply accepts it. Later on, 15 years later, maybe he's understood physics, everything, distant objects look small. But at 3 or 4, he simply accepts what his mother says. That is a socialized mindset. You can't frame your own reality, you depend on somebody else's reality presented to you. Most traditional intuitive definitions of leadership, there's a leader who sets the reality and the followers are expected to follow it. And the blind cults survive on this. I say, I'll take you to Jesus or I'll take you to Krishna and all of you come behind me, people go. Right, wrong, I'm not saying. That's one space where the subject, it's the subject's mind. So the reality is he's not capable of framing his own reality. Whereas as you evolve and grow, Keegan explains it so beautifully. He says, then there's a self-authorized mindset. I keep joking and saying the Balasubramaniams of the world, the Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, etc., who fashion their reality and say my way or the highway, and then say, okay, I have fashioned a reality, come follow me, I'll take you to the other side of the world. And then these people are actually, they just can't allow other realities to come in. And they're so dominantly powerful that they fashion it, they self-authorize themselves, and others simply accept it. But the real leadership is not just this. And some situations you have to be social. Like I gave the example of your own parents or my parents. I would know my father is wrong, but I would just respectfully tell him, okay, I'll do it for you. You would always say, don't really use internet for the banking. Go to the bank and get my passbook entered and come back. No, I would say, what does it matter? I'm showing you a pension has been credited. He said, no, 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 I want to see it in my passbook.
I want to talk a passbook, yes.
Yeah, right. And I would go do it for him and come back. Now he's no longer there. I still remember it and say, I would do it still, cheerfully do it. Because I said, okay, old man, let's let him feel happy and comfortable. His money is safe. Somehow you would believe that if the reflect on your passbook, it is safe. Anybody could still knock it off, but you would still believe it is safe. But in self-authorizing, these are the real leaders of the world who create institutions. They are the entrepreneurs of the world. But Keegan says the first level is what we call they're the people who are dependent. Socialized people are dependent. The self-authorizing people are independent. They fashion their own reality. But he says the self-transformational people, self-transformed people, where they are the ones who understand interdependence. They are the ones who understand reciprocity. They are the ones who really understand that in some situations I need to be socialized, some other situation I need to be self-authorizing, and unless I be in the self-transformed space, I can't get into the other two spaces. But that is the real evolution of leadership. Most of Indian thought enables you to become mindfully self-transformed. That is a struggle, that's a sadhana, that is the spirituality of it. It's about transforming ourselves to recognize a true self. And that is so it's very easy for us to relate it, and you don't have to explain it in a subject-object relationship or psychology framework, but you can simply say, my struggle is to know my inner self. And that's what Ramana Maharshi says so beautifully. He says, just start with the question, who am I? Right? And keep asking that question, you get self-transformed.
Yeah, our favorite quote on Raman Maharshi is the one where I think someone asked him, how do we treat others? And he said, there are no others. And the
Others.
moment you say that, everyone just smiles and says, yes, if everything is interconnected, then there's no me and you. Um, uh, Sometimes leaders who are successful tend to repeat the same success formula. And some of my biggest challenge as a coach is sometimes to say it worked for you then, the context has changed, you have changed, and you have to let go of something that helped you succeed. But there is a reluctance to do that. So, what do you think triggers people to actually bring that change? Or how do we get people to say, let go of something that's helped you and pick up something new? And there's no guarantee it's going to work. How do we do that?
I think we live in a world of SOPs, and this is what the cookie cutter model of the West teaches. I keep making this joke. Let's take a consulting organization, any consulting organization, a major consulting organization around the world. They have their own knowledge systems, they have their own models frame we put into it. And whether you're a consultant for them in the US or in Egypt or in Antarctica or in India or in China, you have the same model that you follow, and you put all the solution frameworks in that model. Leadership doesn't operate that way. Leadership is always in a context.
Right.
And because the context is so dynamic, the world is never the same. You and I have a conversation tomorrow, it's a different context. Thousands of your cells have died, thousands of my cells have died. You have built knowledge somewhere else, I built knowledge somewhere else. I start processing differently. We have to recognize that we're different. We don't. It's easy, it's very comforting not to be different. We all can't, most human beings, it's not about dealing with loss. No, it's not about it's not about change, sorry. It's not about change. It's about dealing with the loss that change brings. The comfort I have acquired by believing in something for 50, 60, 70 years of my life, if I have to change now, it's an enormous loss. Whether it could be religious beliefs, it could be my ideology, it could be my leadership models, it could be my communication styles. That's not easy. Now it's not about the challenge of learning new things. It's about losing the comfort, and that loss is too much for me to renegotiate. So it's all about telling people it's in context. And the second more important thing is there are no SOPs in this world. The problem is SOPs only operate when this exact same context repeats. So then you can apply it. I keep telling the people I work with or train, I tell them, see, you should learn how to allow experience to inform you. The moment experience influences you, you've lost the battle. You're falling in the cookie cutter space. If it informs you, tell the data point. When I did this last time in this context, this was the result. So that's one data point for me. If I do it in that particular way, if that had been that is the context today, then this will be the kind of result I get. But since I don't know the context today, this is one data point I have. If you allow it to influence you, irrespective of whatever the context, you'll simply be doing it exactly and say, no, when I did it last time, it worked, I'm doing it today. Many times it may succeed. We may not even distinguish whether the context is same or not. That is where I write in the book, learn to go to the balcony, start viewing yourself like a drama, see the role you're playing, see the context in which you're operating, see the people around you. They are different. They're all packaged differently. Their DNAs are different. Their storylines are different. Their public narratives are different. Appreciate it and then recalibrate your action and go back and do it. So it's okay if you made a mistake. You just repeated it, doesn't matter. You pick it up immediately and correct it immediately. So this, Ronald Heifetz, the adaptive leadership expert, talks it so beautifully. He says, going to the balcony, coming back to the dance floor, constantly moving. Here I say, playing the observer role, like Ramana says, we call it Drishti Bhav. Bringing the Drishti Bhav, being the observer, watching over yourself, playing the drama properly, do your dharma. That's playing the role. The context in which I am talking today is just a person sharing information with another expert on this field. But in a different context, if I'm coaching, I can't speak like this. I got to make sure that he gets counseled properly, he gets to have a utilizable idea, practical application in the context in which he's operating. So it may be the same leadership language, the same words, but the way it's presented, packaged, and delivered would be very different in different contexts.
Let's talk about the word power. There is an exercise we do where we ask people to pick what they value and what they least value, and they get a deck of cards, and power is one of them. And one common thing, I mean, if I look at Indian managers, many people will put power at the bottom in terms of what they don't want. But if you actually look at the way they operate, the moment they get access to power, they would like to control and drive things. Why do we have such a complicated relationship with power in our country? And someone described it that power with positive intent to serve, power is influence with positive intent to serve is what leadership is all about. Why do we have such a complicated relationship with power? We want it and yet we don't want it and we think it's a bad word. What's your view?
No, I always, you seem to read my mind with certain things. I always say money and power. Indians are very funny people.
Yes.
They want to pretend that they don't want it. No, I'm spiritual. I'm not bothered about money. Why don't you simply say, I love to earn money? And then we want to pretend we are very simple. I know I don't wear a silk saree. I never travel by business class. No, we don't. Everything is in a context. If I used to sleep on a footpath when I started my NGO and I could not afford a hotel, I would just think today if somebody gives me a five-star hotel, I'll take it. It's all in context. I can either glorify what 30 years ago the way I lived, nor can I really get attached to the kind of life now in the position that I am in that I can lead now. So it's not about any of these things. So the way I look at it is we got to start pretending. It's okay to be vulnerable and say I enjoyed it. Okay, I had this good meal, I enjoyed it. There's nothing wrong in it. The problem is we don't break up or deconstruct power. Power actually I would see it in four spaces. Now, the first thing is that most people confuse it. They don't really break it down and see which is the highest in the hierarchy of power. The real power, people in leadership, in the way they are used to it in the exercise of authority, is power over others. Now, I must appreciate that a lot of us get power only with others. If I'm alone, I'll feel weak and useless. But if the 10 people with me, like a typical self-help group, I keep saying, my self-help group women, if the 20 of them come together, it's very difficult to negotiate with them. They know exactly what they want. But take one lady at a time, you can possibly help negotiate with them. You can talk to her. So power with is one thing. Power over is something which most of us get used to, and we think that is what is power. But what we don't know is power over somebody is power to do something. And that's why you said power to do something constructive. But the real power is power within. That's why I call my book Power Within. Can I really exercise power within me, not to demonstrate power over you, but to constantly see how do I use power with you to do good to the world at large? The moment you externalize it in the context of doing good, I think you redefine the equation completely. And that is how power should be seen. Most people stop it at the power over level. And they say exercise of power over somebody else, whether it's to do what I want. And even definition, the Western model of definition is getting people to do what you think you want them to do, or influencing them to do what you want them to do. Again, there it's all demeaning, but it's all power over. But the real power within can be inspiring others to see the vision that we could craft together and co-generating a solution together. That is real power within. When you give the space to the other, you give the space for dissent, you give the space for disagreement, but still explore whether we can co-generate something together. Unfortunately, in today's world, there's a battle of power over everybody. And that is the struggle I think India also faces. Typically in the political narratives, in the corporate world, in business families, brothers break apart because it's always equated as power over each other, not power with each other to do good for somebody.
Beautifully said. Let's talk about the difference and the distance between building a business or building an organization to building an institution. We do a lot of work in institution building where we are trying to help people think long term, look at what are some of the default values that get embedded and how that will shape decisions, business partnerships for years to come, so that it, a man who plants trees in whose shade he will not sit is perhaps the person who really is building something for time to come. What is the distance between building an organization and building an institution, and what do we do well in our country? And I think we have some distance to go in building better and stronger institutions that don't get swayed with two, three things. They are there forever. Something on institution
I
building.
think it's different people use different words, and you spoke of it in the context of business and institution. But a business itself can be built like an institution. So I would use the word like Philip Zelznick used, looking at an organization and say what purpose an organization serves. We create something. I created a non-profit, and I said that that should serve society and serve people. So I build mechanisms within the structure to do that. Real leadership, and this I can explain in deep terms also. Real leadership, he says, is not about organization is great. You got to do it. And most organizations, when they start in the initial phase of their life, actually have to organize themselves, the set of rules, organograms, power structures, etc., to deliver on certain functionality. Now, after some time, real leadership is when you actually institutionalize values, and that's what makes an institution. Now, I can say my company is building cars, and I'm building cars because that's what I'm trained in. I can make a lot of profit in it. Nothing wrong in that. I build quality, or I can reframe it and say, my value proposition is I'm going to offer affordable, safe transportation opportunities to citizens. And genuinely believe in it. It's not just a slogan. You could get exposed in no time if you don't believe in it. So if I genuinely constantly believe, how do I enable safe travel for you? How do I enable cheaper travel all the time for you? How do I make sure that things are so then I will really invest not in profits. Because in business, building a business, your focus is on shareholding and your focus is on profit maximization. Building an institution, your focus is on stakeholding. Your purpose will be on benefit optimization. I'm creating benefits. All of us have to share the benefits because we all have, I create value which we all share. So it's a huge, distinctly different animal. And we in India, I think for a long time, culturally, I'm talking of 300, 400 years ago, before the colonization and its impact really hit us, when individualism was not celebrated, which I luckily had the privilege of experiencing this with tribal communities, where we taught them individualism. We said, your land, your house. Before that, it was my jamma. From that hill to this valley was the chieftains would mark out and say, all of you cultivate, and they'd all share it equitably. Now that's all gone. It's only my early experiences. Now those things may not even exist. So where we celebrated the community, where we celebrated the collective ownership, the collective thinking of ideas, everything. That's why today in India we become so senselessly individualized. We're gone far away from it. We have no sense of collective ownership of the nation. We expect some man out there will wave a magic wand and will save this country. We won't take a piece of paper from the street and throw it out. It's funny that the Prime Minister has to give a call for communitizing, keeping our country clean. To give a call for communitizing, addressing issues of society. No, it should be part of our damn jobs. We are all citizens of this country and we should see it as part of my responsibility. But that is how India was. But then we became so individualistically driven that we are more focusing on the business, what I use the word business in the sense of profit maximization, shareholding, thought, thinking process. We have to go back to our institutional frameworks, the traditional institutions, even family as an institution, kinship as an institution. Today we have made it caste-based thinking. We spoke about the sacrifice in our country in the Mahabharata. It says, for the good of the village, a man should be willing to sacrifice himself. For the good of the larger geographical area, the village should sacrifice its entire self. For the good of the kingdom, a smaller territory should sacrifice itself. It's always about Tyaga. Vivekananda says the national ideals of India should be Tyaga and Seva, which is what it was. So Tyaga and Seva is embedded in the DNA of institution building, whereas mine, and mine alone is embedded in the world of business making. Now every business can, I'm not using business as a corporate entity, I'm just talking thinking. Every business can evolve into an institution that actually promotes this collective public good. At the same time, private gain is not bad, but the primacy of social intent should be greater than the private gains that we look at. Whereas in businesses, the primacy of intent is private personal gains. Whereas if you're a real institution looking at societal welfare, it's not that you have to sacrifice personal gain, but the primacy of intent is societal, it's always public good.
So if leaders, I mean, a lot of L&D people we work with, if they were to say, what should we read? What are the 2 or 3 books we should start with to read to understand and appreciate Indic wisdom in the context of leadership? What would be 3 books that you would recommend?
First thing I would say, though it looks a little cliche, but I'm still going to say it, is start off with the Bhagavad Gita itself. We keep talking about it, it's so powerful, the very appreciation of Karma Yoga, or even the context of Vishada Yoga. A great leader like Arjuna, a great archer, extremely competent, suddenly goes through a crisis of competence. He's lost his confidence, he becomes very vulnerable. But in that vulnerability, he seeks a mentor. See, no, everybody thinks, when positions of power and authority, people are hesitant to seek mentors. Everybody needs mentorship. In one context, I might need, some other context, you might need. Each of us have to help each other in mentoring each other in different situations. Having a confidant is so beautifully communicated in Vishada Yoga, though it says Vishada. But it's also another very excellent thing. Self-doubt is okay to have. But self-doubt leading to important giving up is what Arjuna starts off with. But that self-doubt cultivated into answer and giving a way forward, leading to knowledge gain, is what Krishna demonstrates. So living in self-doubt is not bad. Self-doubt, giving you the humility to acquire the competence to grow, is what Krishna tries to demonstrate. So Bhagavad Gita is a very powerful textbook of leadership, the way I see it. Chapter 16 is so beautiful. It talks about the asuric qualities, the daivic qualities, etc. It's all in us. In the context in which we always, we become so caught up in our asuric qualities that we forget that there's a huge package within us that has to be unpacked and opened up. I would say Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You need a toolkit. You need a practical approach. Gita is all abstract. But how do you do it? Start off yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, very clear, step by step. You can't simply jump into dhyana and samadhi. You go step by step, go to dharana, then go to dhyana, then go to samadhi. So that's a beautiful incremental way of progressing the practice of leadership. It's a powerful toolkit. So one thing is that, the other thing is, and if you're in public leadership space, I would say try to go through the Arthashastra. If you're in the corporate world, even there Arthashastra principles really help. But I would say from the Indic context, even if you can do these two well, but one real book I would recommend if people are very serious. 2 books actually, they're really serious. Adi Shankara's works. One is Viveka Chudamani, the ability to discriminate real and unreal. In today's world, we all need it. the ability to separate out the fake from the true, the ability to discriminate. That's the power of discrimination, in simple words. That's the real crest jewel of discrimination is Vekachudamani. And Shankara's other work, Atma Bodha, if you want to really understand yourself, no, Daniel Goleman came to India, understood Swadhyay, and then got a PhD on that.
That's
And we now study it and say EQ, EQ. But Atma Bodha or Bhagavad Gita is all about Swadhyay, starting to understand yourself, diving deep into yourself and exploring yourself and coming out. So I think this is more than enough in my opinion. That will take a lifetime, and to practice, I don't know how many lifetimes, but it's an effort all of us make.
Let me end by asking you, Dr. Balu, why do you do what you do? I know it's probably a long answer, but what makes you do what you do?
I think I always see myself, trying to appreciate what Swami Vivekananda said. He said it so powerful. Two statements which I'm still trying to figure out. One, he said, "I call every young man a traitor, who, having been educated at people's expense, pays not the least heed to them." I studied in public institutions and I paid 200 rupees a semester to become a doctor. Collectively, I spent 1800 rupees as fees. I can't even imagine how little it is today. One meal costs more today. And I see that I still not given back to society, which made me what I am. The second thing Vivekananda says again so beautifully, he says, "I do not believe in a God or religion which cannot wipe away the widow's tears or bring a piece of bread to the orphan's mouth." Now, I thought I started doing it, I did a lot of it, but still I've not been able to discover that God or religion which I'm searching for. And so I find different mechanisms, ways in which to express myself. And so to conclude, I would say the most powerful Vedic statement which Vivekananda gave as the motto of the Ramakrishna mission. He says, "Atmano mokshartam jagat hitaya." This is not about attaining moksha. It's not about inner realization. It's about inner realization to the outer expression of service to the other. Jagat's hita is mattering. So I'm convinced of that statement, and I strongly believe that someday I will have the ability to discover my inner self. But right now, the only path I can see is expression to the outside world. So I do what I do as a very selfish requirement of hoping that someday, by this selfless work of doing it for the outside, I can discover my inside someday or that.
I'm sure your work will inspire so many people. After listening to this, I'm sure they're going to read at least one of the books that you've recommended, and that's how the flame of thinking, reflection goes ahead. I think the endeavor that we have at Tutul is that for every Western story, can we have an Indian example? Not force fitting it, but contrasting and learning from both. I think the answers. I've told stories of Guru Nanak to German CEOs, and even though the context may be very different, the principles are so universal. I think it's been an honor listening to you. Thank you so much for what you do, and we hope to read many more books and many more talks from you, Dr. Balu. Thank you so much from Tutul Dialogues.
Thank you so much for the time taken to have a discussion with me. Namaste.